Horror and science fiction is a blend that seems impossible on the surface, but when done right, can lead to some mind-boggling stories. And when it comes to the perfect marriage between science fiction and horror, the first name that comes to our head is Night Gallery. Night Gallery was an anthology series helmed by Rod Serling that produced some episodes that still give us sleepless nights. That's why in today's video, we'll count down 20 spine-chilling episodes from the Night Gallery that will keep you awake at night. But before we get started with the video, we have a small request for you. If you like our content, subscribe to us and like this video. It might just be a simple click for you, but it means a lot to us. Now that we've got that out of the way, let's get started.
Evidence, and you'll not come out of it with 1 cent of my money. Not a penny.
The Housekeeper. Kicking off the list, we have The Housekeeper. The story of The Housekeeper starts with a wealthy man named Cedric Anton hiring an old woman as an outkeeper. He takes the woman to a diner and introduces her to his wife, who's sitting at another table with a different man. Cedric complains about his wife and claims that she's a very rude woman. Cedric asks if the housekeeper had the chance to swap places with his wife, would she do it? But the old housekeeper claims that that isn't possible. So Cedric tells her about a personality transfer process, which is nothing but transferring the soul from one body to another body, and vice versa. This was extremely confusing for the housekeeper, but she agreed only because she would also inherit Cedric's wife's fortune after the soul transfer process. After Cedric completes the soul transfer procedure, the old housekeeper, who's now inside his wife's body, claims that he's a bad person and decides to leave him. She also wanted to take all the fortune for herself, but Cedric was not letting that happen. Before the housekeeper can leave, he brings another old woman and transfers her soul inside his wife's body, claiming that he'll keep repeating the process until he's successful. This was definitely a terrifying episode, especially the soul transfer scenes, assisted by the ominous background music. Class of 99. The story of the Class of 99 revolves around the graduating class of 1999 and their final exam. For their final exam, their professor organized an oral test where he would ask the students questions, and he would judge them based on their answers. He started asking the students multiple questions, and most of them answered it correctly, but there was one student named Johnson who wasn't able to answer a few questions and argued back with his professor. This did not go well, and the oral exam soon took a dark turn. The professor raised a white kid and deliberately made him slap a black student in the class. Then he raised another white kid and asked if he thought that there was an enemy in the class that could pose a great threat to his kind. So the kid pointed toward an Asian kid, to which the professor asked what he would like to do to the enemy, and the white man responded that he would kill the guy. Thus, the professor handed him a gun and ordered him to kill the Asian guy. The white guy went close to the Asian guy, but could not kill him. He claimed he didn't know if the Asian guy was the enemy and didn't want to do something he'd regret. This threw the whole class into chaos, and everyone started panicking. Thus, the professor ordered his assistant to stop this, and the assistant pressed a switch, and everyone in the class froze. The professor then only unfreezes Johnson and orders him to take the gun from the white guy and kill him. Surprisingly, he did as he was asked, and it was revealed that the guy he killed was actually a robot. Later, we witnessed the graduating ceremony of the Class of 99, where it was revealed that all of them were automatons and would do their best to embody all the traits of humans. This episode was truly terrifying because it was essentially an essay about the real nature of human beings, their jealousy, their hostility towards people who are different from them, and the lengths they will go to prove that they're superior.
Pookie, where are you? Come here, boy, come here, Pookie!
Tell David. Tell David is a mind-boggling tale that begins when a woman named Anne accidentally lands on a house that she shouldn't have. While driving back to her home, Anne gets lost and meets a weird couple who have some of the most advanced gadgets of that time. The couple, David and Pat, helped Anne find their way back home. But in reality, David was actually Anne's son who came back to the past to warn her of an impending doom. In a later conversation with Anne, David reveals about his past. He recalls that his mother killed his father in a fit of rage because she caught his father cheating. Later, her mother even killed herself before appearing on trial. This left David all alone in the world, and he made Anne promise that she wouldn't let her jealousy take over her. After leaving David's home, Anne finally connects the dots and realizes that her son was trying to warn her about what she was about to do. But even though she knew what not to do, all the events unfolded in the same way David had told her. This means that despite David's attempt to change the past, he failed miserably. Anne still succumbed to her jealousy and lost the chance to see her son grow up in front of her. Since Aunt Ada Came to Stay. Since Aunt Ada Came to Stay is the story of two couples named Craig Lowell and Joanne Lowell, whose lives turn upside down when Joanna's sweet Aunt Ada comes to live with her. Ever since Ada came to live with them, Craig, who was a lecturer at a university, felt that something was wrong with her. So much so that when he catches Ada using a special herb in tea, he gets it tested. He learns that it isn't poisonous or anything dangerous, but it does have a folklore attached to it. The herb was generally used by witches to transfer their body from one host to another. Craig is shaken to the core after learning this, and goes to meet a professor, who finds that she's actually dead. Then he returns home and confronts the witch, who claims that she indeed has her eyes set on Joanna. Thus, Craig tries to contact the professor to learn how to defeat the witch, but the witch kills the professor before he can reveal anything. This prompts Craig to stay on his guard, and on the day the witch is supposed to transfer her soul inside Joanna, he tries to stay by her side. When the witch tries to take over her body, he fights her but loses to the might of the witch. Thus, the ghost of his professor comes to his aid and tells him the way to kill the witch. After killing her, the couple's life returns to normal, and the next day, Joanna kisses Craig goodbye. But later, she gives a creepy smile, signifying that the transfer was complete and the one Craig killed was actually his wife. The Dark Boy. The story of the Dark Boy starts with a teacher named Judith Tim joining a new school, where she's able to see a dark-haired boy that no one is able to see. Even the women who hired her don't tell her the reality of the Dark Boy. Tim is a workaholic, so she decides to work the night too, when she notices the Dark Boy snooping on her. Later, she tells the woman who hired her about this event, but they claim not to know anything about the Dark Boy. The next day, a man named Tom Robb comes to admit his son, Edward, and while doing research, Tim finds out that the Dark Boy's name is Joel Robb, and he's also Tom's son. But the weird thing is that Joel was stuck in 4th grade for the last 2 years, so the next time Joel comes to snoop on her, Tim greets him and tries to help him progress with his studies, but Joel runs away. Thus, Tim visits Tom the next day and inquires about his son. This is when Tom reveals that Joel is dead and haunting the school. He claims that he can also see his son, but is afraid of him. However, Tim is not scared and decides to help Joel move on to the afterlife. The next night when Joel visits her, she tells him a story, and Tom also arrives after getting past his fears. In the end, both Tom and Tim help Joel move on to the afterlife. The House. The House is a very peculiar episode that's not disturbing, but will definitely mess with your head. The story revolves around a woman named Elaine Latimer, who frequently dreams about a certain house. In her dreams, she drives through the road and finds the house extremely beautiful, so she knocks on the door. But before anyone can open the door, she leaves. She tells her dream to her doctor, who claims that she might have seen the house before, and that's why it's registered in her subconscious. When Elaine leaves the hospital, she accidentally embarks upon a road leading her to the same house she'd been dreaming of. There, she meets a real estate agent who's selling the house at the exact same time. This intrigues Elaine, and she decides to buy it. But when the agent takes her inside to give her a tour, surprisingly, Elaine already knows what's in the house. She inquired why the previous owners left such a beautiful house, and the agent answers that the house was haunted. But despite knowing this fact, Elaine bought the house. Even after purchasing it, Elaine still had dreams about visiting the house. However, when she notices that someone repeatedly knocks on the door, she tries to catch the culprit. And in a surprise twist of events, it's revealed that Elaine is the ghost that has been haunting this house all this time. And that's the story. Pretty peculiar and mind-bending, right? Friday Night. Friday Night revolves around a couple named Tom and Leona Ogilvy. Tom is a writer, and he inherited a house left by his dead uncle, Zachariah. When they moved into the house, they were forbidden to touch the trunk that his late uncle left, because he insisted that someone would come for it. But after the couple moved inside the house, weird things started happening, which drove them insane, and the trunk was at the center of all this chaos. So Leona decides to get rid of it, but surprisingly, the trunk somehow returns to the house. This leads to even more chaos. Thus, Tom decides to lock the trunk in a room, but somehow the trunk still makes it back, and that's when they hear a knock at their door. When they open the door, they were greeted with the decomposed body of his uncle, who inquired about his trunk. They let his ghostly uncle inside their house, and he did what he needed to. But when Tom went to check the truck again, he found that the trunk was still there, and his dead uncle left a note that said he'll come back again next Halloween. But this was too much for the couple, so they decided to leave the house and put it on sale. A Fear of Spiders. The story of A Fear of Spiders revolves around a man named Justice Walters, who suffers from a severe case of arachnophobia. He was actually dating a woman named Elizabeth, who lived upstairs in the same building, but he has now become hostile towards the woman and treats her with disrespect. Immediately after that, he witnesses a small spider in the sink and washes it down. After some time, he witnesses another spider, but this time it's a bit bigger, so he tries to wash it down the sink too. Although this spider was more adamant, it eventually washed down the sink. After some time, Justice sees another spider in his room, but this time the spider is the size of a dog. Thus, he runs away from his house and takes refuge in Elizabeth's home. The woman listens to his story and asks her to come with her to his room to see if there's actually a spider the size of a dog, and she just locks Justice in the room, where he claims that he witnessed the spider. Justice begs her to let him out, but she just gives him a taste of what rude behavior really looks like. In the end, we hear a scream coming from Justice's room, indicating that the spider got to him. The Different Ones. The story of The Different Ones starts with a boy named Victor, who's constantly bullied by others because of his physical deformity that makes him ugly. He's shunned by everyone and constantly made fun of. Thus, his father, Paul Koch, decides to contact the government and seek their help. But with respect to surgery, there can't be much done for Victor, so the government suggests sending Victor to a distant planet called Borean. To give his son a better future, Paul decides to do this and sends Victor to an entirely new planet. On this new planet, instead of being shunned, Victor is received with warmth and considered handsome because the people living on this planet suffer the same genetic condition as Victor. In the end, Victor finally finds acceptance and love. This episode seemed terrifying when we learned about the facial deformity of Victor, but it beautifully sheds light on the prejudice differently abled people face in society.
Truly sorry. Well, I've got to be off now.
The Caterpillar. The story of the Caterpillar revolves around Stephen Macy, who falls in love with his boss's wife Rona, and devises a sinister way to get rid of his boss. But things do not go as smoothly as planned, and he is forced to live with the horror he wished upon the other. When Stephen Macy falls for Rona, a local man named Robinson witnesses his lust and hunger for the woman, and suggests a way to get rid of Macy's boss. He tells Macy about a caterpillar called Earwig, who loves eating earwax. Once it enters someone's ear, it ends up eating its way into the person's brain, giving him a painful death. Initially, Macy is reluctant, but his lust for Rona takes over, and he pays Robinson to put the caterpillar inside his boss's ear. But when he wakes up the next day, he finds that Robinson messed up and accidentally put the caterpillar inside his ears. For the next 3 weeks, Macy suffers a fate worse than death. And there's a certain scene where he's tied to a bed so that he doesn't scratch his ears and face and kills him. This is one of the most terrifying scenes you will ever see on television. However, Macy comes out of this ordeal without meeting his demise, and then he's told an even more terrifying news. The caterpillar that entered his ear was a female, and it laid multiple eggs inside his ear, which means Macy will suffer the same fate countless more times before meeting his demise. Midnight Never Ends. The story of Midnight Never Ends starts with a woman named Ruth picking up a hitchhiker named Vincent Riley, but the hitchhiker feels that he knows the woman. He somehow knows the name of the woman, and even Ruth knows the hitchhiker's name. They both get the feeling that they've been living this life countless times. It's like they're stuck in a time loop. After driving for a distance, the duo gets out of their car and enters a diner. Surprisingly, they even know the name of the owner of the diner. All of this was extremely weird, as there's no explanation for what's happening. Suddenly, Riley realizes that they will be greeted by police, and, just as surprisingly, an officer comes and inquires about their visit, and even the officer knew nothing about his origins. It was like they were characters created by someone else without any free will or origins. The officer was terrified because of all these weird happenings around them and shot Riley. And then we learn what was really happening there. All of them were actually characters of a story that were being written by a writer. Since the writer has already written a lot of drafts and tore them to write the story from scratch, every character feels like they have already lived this life before. I wonder if that's the perspective of every character in storybooks and novels. Do they have free will, or are they doing whatever the writer makes them do? The Return of the Sorcerer. The Return of the Sorcerer revolves around the story of a young man named Noel Evans, who's hired as a translator by a sorcerer named Carnaby. The weird part is that the previous 2 translators of the Sorcerer decide to resign before completing the task, but Noel succeeds and successfully translates the Arabic text, which reveals about a sorcerer who still has his powers even after being dismembered. The passage even has an epilogue that claims that the person who reveals this secret will be dismembered in the most brutal manner. This was the reason the previous 2 translators left the job. job. After learning about the revelations, the sorcerer goes into a trance-like state. So his assistant, a sorceress named Fern, explains that Carnaby is terrified because he killed his own twin brother in the same way, and he thinks that his dead brother will return for revenge. Surprisingly, Carnaby's predictions come true, and his dead twin brother returns to take revenge. But in a surprising twist of events, it's revealed that all of these events were orchestrated by Fern, who wanted to become more powerful than the two brothers. In the end, Noel tries to run away from all this madness, but is seduced by Fern, and will probably meet the demise that was predicted for the one who reveals the secret.
To wish you'd never been built.
You can't get help like that anymore. This story is set in an undefined future where humans have finally developed robots capable of doing most of their jobs. The head of the company that produces them, Mr. Hampel, gets a complaint from a couple named Mr. and Mrs. Fulton that their maid robot was unable to perform the task she was supposed to. However, Hampel's lead engineer, Kessler, had a different story to tell. He reveals that the couple has abused the maid robot and broke apart its limbs. But then he notices that something peculiar is happening with the robots. The robots have somehow developed emotions and have become capable of fighting back. They eventually replaced the Fulton's maid robot, but the couple still tried to bully and harass the new one. Thus, the robot fought back, and it was revealed that after gaining certain human emotions, the robots had taken over the facility and imprisoned their makers and owners. There's a possibility that they're even gearing up for a world takeover.
Tomorrow is going to be the beginning of all that. That's all.
The Boy Who Predicted Earthquakes. This is one of the few episodes that tells you about the horrors of nature. The story revolves around a boy named Herbie Bittman, who has the extraordinary power to predict the future. He exhibited the power to predict any mishappening before it happens. From natural calamities like earthquakes and tsunamis to cases of kidnapping, he was able to predict everything about which he had knowledge. Although no one believed him at first, all of his predictions came true, and he soon got a TV show of his own, where he would talk about random things, and then suddenly predict something that was about to happen in the future. However, one day he insists that he does not want to do the show, but the owner of the channel was adamant and persuaded him to continue. And that day, Herbie predicted the end of human civilization. He predicted that the sun would explode, and that the world we know would not exist, and neither would we. To be honest, this is one of the best episodes we remember from the anthology, mostly because of the brilliant acting of Clint Howard, and slowly reveals all of its horror elements.
Title: The Diary. It's our initial offering in the Night Gallery.
The Diary. The story of The Diary starts with a column reporter named Holly Schaefer, reporting about the misadventures of an actress named Carrie Crane. During Holly's New Year celebrations, Carrie barges into her party and gives her a diary. It was not just a simple diary, but a diary that was about to turn everything upside down for Holly. When Holly opens the diary before midnight, she finds that the 1st of January already has an entry, and it is written in her own handwriting. The entry forecasts that Carrie will commit suicide by jumping from her apartment, and as soon as she reads it, she hears a commotion in her party and finds Carrie dead on the road. Holly was fascinated and thought that she had somehow unlocked the powers of precognition, and even met a doctor to talk about it. Later, when she reads the diary, she finds a journal entry predicting the death of her husband, and unsurprisingly, her husband dies that day. This makes Holly go through a mental breakdown, and she finds out that the journal entries after the 3rd of January are empty. This means she's dead, so she asks the doctor to lock her up, and not give her any sharp object that she could use to harm herself. In the next scene, it can be seen that she's in a mental asylum, calling the doctors for a pen. She thinks that since nothing is written in the diary, that doesn't mean she'll die. She can prevent her death if she makes a diary entry. Here it is revealed that Holly has been patient in the hospital for more than 5 years, and the doctor always plays along with her story, and gives her a pen every day, which she thinks gives her another day to live. That's just how the story ends. Well, we didn't expect this surprising twist of events in the end. The Sins of the Fathers. The story of the sins of the fathers is set in a world that's constantly suffering from plague and famine, and amid this, they have a very weird ritual. There are people called sin eaters who are invited to a dead person's house and given food to eat in front of the deceased. It is believed that the person inherits all the sins of the deceased, allowing the deceased to reach heaven. However, when the father of the church meets his demise, there is no sin eater left in town to perform the ritual because most of them are already dead. So the person assigned to find a sin eater reaches Mrs. Evans' house and requests her to send her husband in return for food and gold coins. But her husband was sick, so she denied his requests. However, greed takes her over, and she tells her young son Ian to perform the ritual, but not in the right way. She basically tells him to scam the people there and pretend that he's eating and performing the ritual. But instead of doing the ritual, he would steal all the food in his robes and feast only after arriving home. Ian agrees and does as he's told. He successfully scams the people and comes home with the food. But her mother arranges the food in trays and breaks the news that his ill father passed away while he was gone. She forces him to perform the sin-eating ritual on his father's body so that his father can go to heaven. In the end, the Evans household shrieks with the cries of Ian because he's eating the sins of a sin-eater, which means all the sins his father has eaten in his lifetime will be transferred to him. Whisper. The story of Whisper revolves around a young couple named Charlie and Irene Evans, but Irene has some special powers that allows her body to be inhabited by lost souls. These souls often stay inside Irene for a while and then leave, but all of this changes when the soul of Rachel comes into her life. Charlie knew about these weird powers of Irene, and just like an understanding husband, he accepted her the way she was. But one day, she gets possessed by Rachel and makes Charlie dig up a grave, claiming that the grave belongs to their dead son and bury him somewhere better. Charlie knew that once he finished her order, Rachel would leave, and Irene would return back to her body. So he does as he's told. After finishing his task, he returns to Irene, and to his horror, he hears the voice of Irene calling out to him in the distance, claiming that she can't reach her body. Well, allowing other spirits to inhabit her body might not be a good idea after all. The Ring with the Red Velvet Ropes. The Ring with the Red Velvet Ropes tells the story of a boxer named James Figg, who's transported to another dimension and asked to fight the champion of the world named Roderick Blanco. James wasn't the kind of person who backed out of a fight, so despite all of these mysterious circumstances, he agreed to the fight. Later at night, the wife of Roderick, Sandra Blanco, meets him and advises him to lose the fight. She reveals that no one has been able to beat Roderick for a long time, and he might have the potential to beat Roderick, but it would still be better for him to lose. This is extremely cryptic for James, but he doesn't pay any heed to her advice, and during his fight with Roderick, he knocks him out, becoming the new champion. Everyone rejoices and announces him as the new champion, and suddenly, he witnesses Roderick's body turning into a skeleton and decomposing. This is when he learns the horrifying truth about this place. Roderick, the former champion of this place, has been alive for more than a century and has been fighting new boxers to stay alive. Now, James is the new champion, which means James will also have to fight the upcoming boxers to save his life. If he slacks off, he loses his life. A Question of Fear. We're going to be honest. A Question of Fear is probably one of the most terrifying and ghostly episodes from the Night Gallery, and we would recommend you not watch this episode alone at night. This episode starts with a person named Dr. Mozzie telling a group of people about how he spent a day at a haunted house, and how he had to deal with the consequences later on. But one person from the group, named Colonel Malloy, calls him a coward. So Dr. Mozzie tells him that he'll give him a huge sum of money for spending a night in a haunted house. Later, he drives Malloy to the haunted house, and as soon as Malloy enters the house, a series of completely terrifying events start happening around him. Eventually, he thinks the house is really haunted, but later learns that all of it is fake and Dr. Mozzie is trying to scare him. The next day, he's confronted by Mozzie, who reveals the reason for bringing Malloy here. He reveals that his father was a pianist whose hand was burned by Malloy when Malloy was in the armed forces. That's why he swore revenge on him. He claims that he created a serum that would slowly turn him into an earthworm, but Malloy is smart and claims that Mozzie is bluffing. So Mozzie asks him to check the cellar, where he'll find Mozzie's colleague, who was also transformed into an earthworm by him. Malloy goes near the cellar but was disgusted by the slime and decides not to move further. Then Malloy comes near the table and shoots himself, claiming that Dr. Mozzie has lost. But after Malloy meets his demise at his own hands, Mozzie reveals that he won and there was nothing in the cellar. He was just bluffing, and Malloy fell for his trick. Big Surprise. Big Surprise revolves around a kid named Chris, who gets tipped by an old man that if he starts digging in a certain place, he'll find a big surprise. So Chris starts digging and even convinces his friends to dig with him. After a long session of digging, they were still unable to find anything. Thus, Chris' friends leave him alone, but Chris is determined to find the big treasure. As Chris keeps digging, he finally finds a box, and when he opens it, he's greeted by the same old man who tipped him off about the box. This left the audience in ambiguity about whether the old man was dead. Why did he scare Chris? And what was his real purpose in making Chris dig for the box? All of these questions, but no answers. Marvelous Verdict. The Night Gallery lasted 3 seasons and featured more than 100 short stories. And we'll be honest with you, not all of these stories are worth your time because most of them are actually duds, which led to a great build-up, but fail in their execution. Since we have covered Night Gallery, which other horror series would you like us to cover next? Do let us know in the comments section. With that being said, if you like our content, like it and subscribe if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks everyone!
No. Evening, William.